Welcome, dear dreamers. Tonight we drift across centuries, starting at a firelit camp where elders tell of kings, 7 in all, each leaving behind small changes: a new law, a wall, a market square, threads weaving into the fabric of Rome. Imagine their footsteps on quiet stone streets after the city sleeps. We'll pass them gently, like moving through a dream, into the Republic's promise of shared power. Here, decisions are made slowly, carefully, so that no one person can rule alone. Doesn't it feel good to know some problems find peace in patient solutions? Imagine 2 tiny figures resting on the soft edge of a quiet riverbank. The water moves slowly, its surface shifting under a pale moon, carrying them gently as if the night itself has chosen to guard them. There is no rush here, only the sound of small ripples lapping at the shore. You can picture the faint mist rising from the water, settling lightly on their blankets. The air is cool, but still. Above, thin branches sway and cast faint shadows that stretch and retreat with the movement of the moonlight. The children sleep, unaware that their place in the world has already been decided by forces far beyond their reach. Their story begins before they open their eyes to the world. They were said to be born to a young woman named Rhea Silvia, who was a mortal but bound to serve as a priestess. By the ancient customs of her role, she was meant to remain untouched by motherhood. Yet in the telling of this tale, the god Mars, the figure of war and fierce strength, became their father. This mix of mortal and divine blood placed them outside the life their mother knew, and their arrival was not welcome to those who feared what their existence might mean. In the hearts of some, the twins were a sign of power that might upset the balance of those already in control. From the very first moment, their lives were threatened. Those in power decided they should not live to grow. In the silence of early morning, they were taken to the river's edge by guards meant to see the task through. The water was to be their end, a cold and unfeeling force to wipe away their story before it could even start. The men charged with the deed placed the tiny bundle into a small wooden trough, pushing it into the steady current. It drifted away, and the figures on the shore faded into the distance until nothing remained but the lapping of water against the sides of the vessel. The current carried them past reeds that bent under the weight of insects, past pale stones that glimmered under the moonlight. The river watched them pass. The boat came to rest against a shallow bank, caught between roots that reached into the water like fingers. Here, the 2 brothers lay, their breathing light, their faces still. It was then, the story says, that she appeared. From the shadowed trees came a she-wolf, her steps slow and careful, her head lowered to sniff at them, her eyes steady and bright in the darkness. Instead of harm, she offered warmth. Curling her strong body around theirs, she sheltered them from the night. Her fur was thick, holding the heat of the day that kept the chill from their small bodies. When they stirred and whimpered, her steady heartbeat soothed them back into quiet rest. By the light of dawn, the wolf had fed them with her own care, a moment as strange as it was tender. This image of a wild creature protecting the most vulnerable had a lasting place in the minds of the Roman people. In it, they saw the strength to endure when all odds pointed toward loss. The twins' survival was more than a twist in a tale. It became a sign of something deeper. Romans believed that the gods had favored their beginnings, marking their city's story with resilience. A people who treasured the ability to rise after hardship found comfort in such an origin. It meant the struggles ahead were not signs of failure, but steps toward a greater purpose. As the boys grew, the wolf's role faded in the story, but her care was passed to a kind herdsman and his wife, who gave them a home. Under open skies and on rough hillsides, they learned to move with strength, their legs firm from climbing slopes, their hands sure from building small shelters and tending to animals. The air was filled with the scent of grass and the hum of distant insects. They slept on simple bedding, the stars above acting as their ceiling. Their days were steady, filled with work and the slow building of muscle and skill, but a current of something greater ran through them. They were not just two boys on a farm. Somewhere in their minds, shaped by instinct or destiny, was the knowledge that their lives were meant for more. Each season added to their strength. They learned to speak with quiet weight, to lead others their age in games that felt more like practice for some unseen duty. While their hands knew rope and wood, their minds began to shape plans. Their bond to one another remained unbroken. The river that once threatened to take them away now seemed like a distant ally, part of the chain of events that had saved them. The myth does more than tell of survival. It sets out a pattern that the city of Rome would follow. Faced with danger, it would not sink. It would endure. When left to chance, it would find a way to guide events toward its own strength. And just as the twins were aided first by a wild creature and later by humble folk, Rome too would find allies in unexpected places. The story of Romulus and Remus is more than a piece of folklore. It is a quiet promise that even beginnings touched by fear can grow into something lasting. In this version of their early life, no great armies march, no grand speeches echo in halls, and no crowds cheer. There's only the slow passing of days, the subtle increase of skill, and the steady thickening of trust between the brothers. You can imagine them walking the edge of the same river where they were once abandoned, its water moving with the same calm determination, as if remembering the weight it once carried. This calm hides the fact that change is coming, a change as certain as the sunrise. The Romans saw in these twins the very qualities they valued most: courage in the face of danger, unshakable loyalty, and the belief that their fate was guided toward greatness. In believing that a God had fathered these children and that nature itself had stepped in to protect them, they gave themselves a foundation that no mere battlefield victory could provide. This was the root from which their identity could grow, strong, flexible, and certain of its purpose. The boys, now sturdy and clear-eyed, could look out over the land that stretched toward the horizon. Their hands, once small and fragile, could now lift stones and shape wood. There was no rush in their movements. What they built in those quiet years was not just physical strength, but readiness. In the evenings, as the light faded and the air cooled, they might sit side by side, not speaking much, each knowing the other felt the pull of something larger ahead. The riverbanks that once held their tiny vessel now held their steady footsteps. The trees that gave shade to a resting wolf now marked the path of two young men preparing to leave the known behind. The soil under their feet was firm. the same soil where they would one day set the first stones of a city whose name only they carried within them. The she-wolf, the shepherd, the gentle current, each had played their part. Each had made their survival possible. The path ahead would demand more than survival. It would ask them to shape the land, the people, and the future itself. As the sky lightened and the mist began to lift from the hills, their journey toward building that future quietly began. Somewhere ahead, a place waited that would take their names and their labor and turn them into something greater. Just as the moon had once guided the river's shimmer and the night winds had guarded their sleep, the coming dawn would guide their hands. Soon, the first stones of a city would touch the ground, and the long story of Rome would begin. Picture a torch in the quiet of night, its glow moving softly from one pair of hands to another. The flame does not leap wildly. It stays steady, lighting only what is needed at that moment. This is how early Rome passed its leadership, not in sudden bursts, but in careful steps, each ruler taking their turn to hold the light and guide it forward. These were the days of the 7 kings, a line of leaders remembered not for the speed of their actions, but for the lasting marks each left on the young city. Rome in these first generations was small, a cluster of people, homes of wood and clay, and pathways worn by feet far more than wheels. The air carried the smoke of small hearths at evening, and sounds carried differently without the press of tall buildings. It was a city that needed strong yet thoughtful care. Too much force could break the trust of its own people. Too little might invite others to take what they wanted. Into this balance stepped the first king, Romulus, who built not only walls, but the patterns of leadership. His rule was remembered for strength, for giving Rome its outline. But strength alone can tire a people. After him came others who understood that a city's spirit is shaped in many ways, not only through command. Numa Pompilius, the second king, is one of those often spoken of in soft tones. Where Romulus was remembered for the force that set Rome in motion, Numa is recalled for calming its heartbeat. He is said to have shaped the city's religious rites, giving the people not just rules, but rhythms, festivals to look forward to, ceremonies to observe, and times set aside for peace. In a fragile city, these moments might seem small, yet they worked like the threads in cloth, holding all the other parts together. People could look at the calendar and see not just days passing, but meaning placed within them. As the line of kings went on, each brought their own kind of care. Some expanded Rome's reach, bringing in more land and people. Others improved what was already there. Early roads were laid out more clearly, and spaces were created for people to meet or trade. Even simple things, like making sure clean water ran where it was needed, added to the sense that this city was not just surviving, but slowly becoming a place people could rely on. This balance of building and protecting was not perfect, but it kept the city from tipping too far in one direction. Leadership in those days was not only about giving orders. It had to include the quiet skill of weaving different needs together. Farmers wanted fertile ground and safety from raids. Traders wanted roads and markets. Families wanted their homes protected, their disputes settled fairly. The kings who listened, who found ways to give enough to each group without weakening others, were the ones remembered for steady reigns. This was not written down as a set of rules. It was lived in the days and seasons of the city's growth. Some kings still carried a warrior's edge. Conflicts rose, and Rome did fight when it had to. But the memory that stayed was just as often tied to peaceful works. Numa Pompilius brought organized signs of faith. Tullus Hostilius is said to have given Rome practice in defending itself well. Ancus Marcius built bridges and harbors, connecting the city outward. The torch passed again and again. The flame never left to flicker out in carelessness. Each reign added layers you could almost feel underfoot. Streets became better laid, religious buildings and public gathering places took shape, and traditions had time to root themselves into daily life. As these kings ruled, they added to the city's identity. Governance, faith, and infrastructure, different threads, but all tied together to make a stronger whole. Rome was not yet vast, but it began to think of itself as a true home, rather than just a collection of huts and fields. Still, there was always a quiet question. What if a king came who thought more of himself than of the city? What if the flame in his hand was used to burn instead of warm? A young city is delicate. A ruler's greed or cruelty could undo generations of care. The people knew that their customs, their walls, their agreements could hold under fair hands, but might not survive the grasp of a single, unchecked leader. It was not an everyday worry, but it simmered beneath the surface. This thought was not unfounded. Toward the end of this line of kings, stories grew darker. The trust between ruler and people began to strain. The city had grown stronger by now, and its leaders perhaps more aware of their own power. Yet the early work of those who had ruled with balance meant that Rome stood on sturdier ground than it once had. It had traditions, it had gatherings, and it had people used to seeing their lives shaped by something larger than one man's hand. Looking back, each king's contribution fits like a step on a staircase, not equal in size or shape, but all leading upward, one after the other. The first laid the foundation, the second built the patterns of peace, the next brought structure to defense and expansion. Calendars were filled with marked days that combined the divine with the civic. Markets grew into places where goods and ideas mingled. Meeting spaces became regular points in the city's rhythm, just as the seasons turned and festivals returned year after year. These early monarchs did more than govern. They crafted connections between people and their beliefs, between the city and its lands, and between the past and the future. The roads some built did not only carry goods, they carried the sense that Rome was linked to more than itself. The temples and altars did not only serve the gods, they brought neighbors together in shared purpose. The bridges over rivers did not only allow passage, they taught that obstacles could be crossed with planning and care. As the years of the kings passed, Rome's shape grew clearer. Laws were still more tradition than written record, yet they guided behavior. Defenses were more than makeshift walls. There was a rhythm to life that held through harvests, through fairs, through disputes settled by agreed customs. People came to think of Rome not as a place that would vanish with the death of a leader, but as something lasting, built strong enough to outlive any one man. And yet the idea remained. Power in a single pair of hands could be dangerous. Not every king would be as measured as those remembered fondly. The final monarch, by tradition's telling, pushed too far, using fear where there had been trust, In the shadow of such rule, the people and their leaders found themselves at a turning point. The torch would have to be carried differently now, not by one, but by several, so its light could not be turned too easily into flame against its own. Even in the caution of that moment, Rome carried the stability given by these earlier kings. Their years had taught the city how to maintain order, how to blend daily life with larger vision, and how to build not only with brick and stone, but with time and trust. These were lessons that could be passed on just as surely as the torch itself. When the day came to change the way power was held, Rome did so standing on the strong ground these men had laid. So picture again that steady flame, moving from hand to hand in the stillness. Each king in those early years guarded it for a time, held it in his own way, and then passed it on. The flicker and warmth of that torch still shines in the customs and structures that grew from their reigns. And now, watch as it reaches the hands of a new kind of leader, not a king at all, but one of many who will share its weight, marking the slow yet sure birth of the Republic. Imagine a moment when a single crown, long worn without question, is set down on a table. It does not pass to another head. Instead, it is replaced by the idea that two hands, equal in weight, will hold power together. There is no burst of celebration in this vision, only a quiet shift in the air. People who have seen kings all their lives stand in stillness, as if testing whether this change might truly hold. The city feels different without a single figure standing above the rest. The space left behind seems at first uncertain, but also wide enough to welcome new ways of leading. This turn began under a shadow. The last king's rule had grown heavy. His name, Tarquin the Proud, became linked with an image of authority that no longer listened. In his time, the city's trust weakened. What had once been decisions made with the city's good in mind began to feel like commands handed down for one man's gain. Old protections wore thin. Disputes were settled in ways that favored the powerful. Pride, in the sense of dignity, gave way to pride as self-interest. For the people, and for those with enough influence to speak for them, it was a slow build toward a breaking point. When a ruler forgets how delicate trust is, all the careful work of previous years starts to fray. Advisors were still there, but their voices carried less weight against the king's will. The markets still opened each morning, but the air in them was tense. The sight of guards and soldiers did not bring comfort, but a reminder of where power rested. It was not a single act, but many small ones that sent the message. This crown sat too heavily, and its weight was crushing the city it was meant to protect. The change that came was not born from sudden destruction. Rome did not vanish in fire before its new shape emerged. Instead, it was like a careful pulling apart of a knot that had become too tight. The choice was made to end kingship entirely, to place the city's rule into the hands of more than one person at a time. From here came the consulship, two leaders chosen to share equal authority. Each could act, but each could also halt the other if they felt a decision was wrong. It was a form of balance built into the heart of leadership. Alongside the consuls, the Senate began to take stronger form as a body that would help in guiding choices and anchoring decisions against the pull of any single will. Senators were not above fault, but they formed a circle of voices that could weigh matters carefully, speaking for the interests of the city as a whole rather than one ruler's desires. This arrangement did not erase the risk of conflict, but it spread the power out so no single hand could grip it without meeting another. For the people of Rome, this new shape of governance might have felt like a deep breath taken after years of holding it in. The city still faced the same needs: safety, fairness, ways to decide disputes, and a steady flow of food and goods. But now, those needs were to be met by leaders who could not ignore each other's voices. Decisions were made slower, yes, but with more watching eyes. It was a change in tempo, from orders spoken quickly to outcomes shaped through discussion. This shift was, at its heart, a safeguard. No longer could one person build their power until it seemed they stood above the city itself. Now, each consul knew they walked beside another with the same authority, the same right to act, and the same ability to stop a harmful choice. It was a design meant for balance from the first step. The Senate, in turn, would help tether these leaders to the traditions and values the city believed in. Yet if you were among the plebeians, the ordinary citizens watching this, you might still have wondered what it would mean for you. Power had been moved from one man to a small group, but it still rested high above the everyday life of laborers, farmers, and small traders. You could see the sense in having more than one leader. But would their balance of power trickle down into fairer laws, safer streets, and more protection for your rights? Or would it simply be a new arrangement for those already in the circle of influence? In the streets, this question might have been felt more than spoken. Daily work continued. Markets were held, goods exchanged, families tended to their homes. But above this hum of life, the structure of Rome had changed. The faces in charge might alter each year, but the framework stayed: 2 consuls, a senate, and no king. It was a change in who held authority, and perhaps a quiet hope that fairness might find more room to breathe in this new shape. The early republic was not a sudden flowering of equality for all, but it was a step that kept the city from falling into the grip of another unchecked monarch. In the consul's shared rule lay the promise that no decision could be forced through without at least some measure of agreement. This meant that choices, whether about trade, defense, or law, had to survive more than one point of view before becoming reality. For those who had seen the final years of Tarquin's reign, this new way of governing must have felt like the difference between walking a road with high walls pressing in on either side, and walking a road where each turn was met by another walker, keeping pace, deciding together which path to take. It allowed the city to keep moving forward without the fear that the next step might be over ground chosen only by one man. And yet, in its early days, the Republic would be tested. The balance it promised depended on the willingness of leaders to respect the limits placed upon them. This was a trust that had to be renewed again and again, each year that new consuls were chosen. It was also a balance that had to find ways to include more voices over time, or risk new tensions rising between those with power and those without. Still, the moment the crown was set aside marked a quiet turning point. It showed that the city's identity did not rest entirely on the shape of a king's rule. It could adapt, reshape itself, and still keep its foundation. Rome had been built under monarchs, guided by strong hands, but it would now learn to move with two steadying forces answering to each other. This was not a loss of order. It was the creation of a different kind of order, one built to resist the sway of domination. If you imagine standing in the Forum on a morning soon after this change, you might see the symbols of the consul's authority carried before them. You might notice senators walking in small clusters, speaking in low tones about matters to be brought up for debate. There would still be guards and officials, scribes and messengers, but the center of power would no longer be a single point. It was now spread, like seeds in a field, to be tended equally. The Republic's beginning carried the lesson that careful division of responsibility can protect against human weakness. It was not perfect, and it would face tests in the years ahead. But for now it gave Rome a way forward without the weight of a single crown. It gave the people time to see what could grow when decisions were tempered by two equal voices speaking in turn. In time, this change would not only shape political life, but would lead to deeper questions about law and fairness. The city would come to see that the structure of leadership was only one part of stability. The rules that guided daily life needed to be known and trusted by all, not kept in the memories and choices of those in charge. This quiet realization would bring Rome to another step in its journey, placing its laws where every citizen could see, and in doing so, giving the people something solid to trust in. Imagine standing in an open square, the morning light falling gently across flat stone tablets. The words carved there are clear enough for anyone to read. You could walk past with your basket of goods and pause for just a moment, eyes scanning the lines you've seen before, yet always find comfort in. They don't change overnight. They don't hide behind closed doors. They rest in the open, like sunlight that touches everyone equally. The sight alone brings a steady sense that the ground beneath your feet is firm. Before these stones were set in place, the rules of the city were not for everyone to see. They lived in the minds of a few, passed in spoken form, shifting when it suited those who held them. If you were an ordinary citizen, you had no place to check the truth of a claim against you. You could be told the law said one thing on one day and something different the next. Few could say with confidence what was fair and what was not. It was a space where uncertainty could grow, and uncertainty often carries fear with it. In those days, daily life already held enough to manage, harvests to bring in, debts to settle, neighbors to bargain with. To never quite know where you stood in the eyes of the law was to carry an extra weight. It was not felt as a sudden blow, but as a quiet pressure, building each time someone wondered if a dispute would be judged on truth or on favor granted by personal ties. The sense that justice might bend in the hands of the powerful was a concern that traveled from the fields into the heart of the city. The choice to write the laws where all could see was more than a practical step. It was a calm but deliberate answer to years of such unease. 12 broad tablets, each carrying part of the rules that would apply to everyone. The act of carving them into enduring material made a silent promise. These laws would not shift with the mood of a ruler or the interest of an elite council. They could be read. They could be remembered. Any change would be visible, not whispered. Picture a child walking with a parent through the Forum, the wide space where trade and gathering took place. They pass by the standing tablets. The parent rests a hand on the stone, tracing some of the letters while the child watches. "These," the parent could say, "tell us how we live together." Knowing these words were there each day gave a certain peace of mind, even in times when other parts of life were uncertain. The rules might not always favor every desire, but they favored clarity over confusion. Transparency is, in itself, a kind of protection. It means that no matter who you are, you can see the same words as anyone else. A dispute, a question, a claim, it can all be measured against something fixed and visible. When the law is clear to everyone, it is harder for it to be bent in the quiet of private chambers. This was not an idea about perfection. It was about trust. Trust that the rules you followed today would still be the rules tomorrow. Trust that others were living under the same expectations. Daily, people would cross that open space and catch sight of the tablets. Some may have paused, others may have passed without much thought. Yet even in passing, they knew the laws stood there, accessible to all. A farmer from the outskirts could stand beside a trader from the city center and know they shared the same set of rules, carved from the same surface. In a city growing more complex each year, that common ground was as valuable as any stone wall or guarded gate. For those who had lived through the time before, the difference was quietly profound. No longer could someone in authority claim a hidden rule worked in their favor without evidence on the stone to back it up. This shift didn't remove the need for judges or remove disagreements, but it meant that the conversation had to begin from a shared place. Judges still interpreted the laws, but they could not invent them in the moment, not without every eye in the forum seeing the change. Think of it as the difference between walking a familiar road under uncertain skies and walking it knowing the path will not change beneath your feet. You might still face rain or wind, but the stones of the road will hold steady. The 12 tables gave that steadiness to life in Rome. They placed a visible boundary on how power could be used, a reminder that authority had to respect the shape of the law as it was written. This clarity also prepared the city for the pressures that lay ahead. Disputes from within could often be eased by pointing to the open tablets. Trade agreements, property lines, debts, and rights could all be settled with fewer steps into personal conflict. People could spend more of their energy on their work, their families, and their communities, knowing there was a common and public record to guide fairness. Even in times of strain, when tempers ran high or resources grew scarce, the presence of those stones acted like a quiet anchor. It reminded people that the city's order was not simply the will of whoever spoke loudest, but something agreed upon and preserved. In this way, the 12 tables became not just a record, but a safeguard. Each rule was a thread, and together they wove a fabric that could stretch without tearing too easily under stress. It is easy to underestimate the calming power of consistency. A law, once made public and kept steady, can offer a kind of invisible shelter. It lets people move through their days without scanning every horizon for sudden, unseen changes in what is permitted or punished. This shelter builds a collective confidence that contracts will hold, that debts will be measured fairly, that harm will be addressed in known ways. That confidence would prove valuable in the years ahead, when Rome faced not only the disputes of its own citizens, but also the challenges from beyond its borders. A city unsure of its own rules is a city with unsteady footing in any negotiation or defense. With the 12 tables, Rome could meet others, whether allies or rivals, standing on a clearer foundation. Agreements were easier to keep when both sides could point to the carved law that guided them. The open display of the laws also acted quietly as a teacher. Children grew up seeing the words each time they passed through the forum, absorbing the sense that the law belonged to everyone. New citizens, traders from other lands, and even visitors could see the nature of Roman order in the most direct way, by simply reading the stones. In this way, the 12 tables served not only the city's own needs, but also offered a signal to the wider world about how Rome chose to govern itself. In the slow rhythm of Rome's growth, these tablets stood through changing seasons, through markets bustling and empty, through festivals and funerals. People came and went, leaders changed, but the stone remained. That constancy was a steady hand on the city's pulse. Rulers would have to work around them, not above them. Ordinary voices could refer to them without needing permission to enter any private hall. So, envision again that soft morning light on the stone, the quiet movement of people passing by, the shared understanding that lives within those rules. They do not remove all conflict. They do not remove hardship, but they offer all who live in the city the same starting point, the same words to measure right and wrong. In that, there is both safety and reassurance. With the 12 tables, Rome gave itself a gift that would last well beyond the time of their carving. It gave itself a touchstone, something to return to in moments of uncertainty. As the city's reach extended and its encounters grew more complex, that public trust would be an asset as valuable as any wall or army. It was a quiet strength, but one that would hold Rome together in the face of trials both within and without. And soon, the test would come from outside the city's heart, in the form of a danger that would rise over its hills and challenge that very sense of unity. The city is still in the early light when a sound carries over the hills. It's faint at first, like a call you might mistake for a trumpet in the distance, but it does not fade. Horns, deep and long, drift across the fields and walls. It's the kind of sound that changes the rhythm of the morning before any message arrives. Farmers on the edges of the city pause with tools in their hands. Inside the walls, shopkeepers look toward the gates without knowing why. Even before the alarm is raised, the air feels different, holding something it did not the day before. These sounds belong to an army moving closer. The people behind them are the Gauls, a force from beyond the northern lands Rome knows best. They have come far, carrying the signs of their power and their intent. The year is around 390 BCE. The city is not at the height of its strength. Its stone defenses are not yet the endless lines they will one day become. The Gauls do not stop at the outer fields. They move into open ground, and the gates that stand guard over Rome's streets face their test. What follows is not a battle that protects the heart of the city. The walls are breached. The defense falters. Flames begin and then spread. They eat the wooden beams of homes and climb through shops and public buildings alike. The sound of running feet replaces the morning's calm. In such moments, there is little to plan and less to save. When fire chooses a path, it takes it without pause. People carry what they can. Much is lost in minutes. In the streets, smoke shifts the light into strange colors. Ash settles in the air. The sound of voices calling to each other is broken by the noise of collapse. The structures that had seemed permanent only a day before are now bare frames. Stone gives some resistance, but the heat and flames find their way inside. It is not a sight of soldiers locked in combat in every street. It is the quieter, heavier sight of a city's shape disappearing under heat and ruin. Not every part of Rome falls, but what remains is changed. Many leave the streets to gather in safer places. Others stay hidden until the danger passes. Some places are defended, but even these hold the smell of smoke. When the Gauls leave, they do not take the silence with them. What is left is a city marked by loss. Homes are empty shells. Public buildings are damaged or gone. Paths that were once shaded by rooftops are open to the sky. It would be easy, after such a blow, for a city to give in to the weight of that destruction. Many would see it as the end. In other lands and in other times, such an act would mark the close of a city's life. But the people of Rome do not scatter into the countryside to join other towns. They stay, gathering what is left of their goods, and more importantly, what is left of each other. In the open spaces between damaged walls, survivors meet. They speak not of leaving, but of how to start again. You can picture these gatherings in the still warm places where timbers have only just stopped smoking. People stand in small groups, black dust smudging their hands and faces. Their voices are low but certain. Even as some look at the damage with disbelief, others talk of clearing the streets, finding what can be rebuilt, and deciding where the work must begin. Children sit nearby, their eyes following the adults. The sounds of hammering begin only days later, though the smell of ash still lingers. The rhythm of Rome's voice does not fade out. It adapts. What was broken will be replaced. What stood weak will be made stronger. From the moment work begins, there is a decision shaping every choice, not only to return what was lost, but to make it harder to lose again. The walls that encircle the city are rebuilt taller, thicker, and stronger. Gates are reinforced. Paths to store supplies and move people in and out more quickly are made part of the design. Defenses are no longer just barriers. They are tools with thought behind them. Rome learns to prepare for what might come, not just to answer it when it arrives. These changes do more than make the city physically stronger. They reach into the way the people see themselves. To survive such damage and stay means each person sees their role in the city's life more clearly. The idea of Rome is not a set of buildings. It is the people who choose to stay within them. With every repaired wall and cleared street, the people place a new layer of trust in each other's will to continue. The fire has taken roofs and doors, but it has not taken the choice to remain. In the time after the Gauls leave, military discipline sharpens. The idea of readiness is no longer an abstract thought. It has been proven necessary. Exercises are held with more structure. Defenses are checked more often. The city notices where speed matters and where patience strengthens the work. This is not the result of sudden fear, but of learned caution. Rome chooses to build habits that will carry it through the days when horns sound again. It is not loud pride that rises from this rebuilding. It's a quieter, steadier kind of strength, one that settles into the corners of homes and the steps of the marketplace. People go back to their trades. Farmers come again to the city gates with their produce. The smell of cooking replaces the scent of burned wood. The openness of destroyed buildings closes as new walls go up. Streets become shaded once more. Time moves forward, and with it, the memory of what happened becomes not only a story of danger, but a turning point in how the city understands itself. When this chapter of Rome's life is told, it is not just as the sack of a city, but as the moment it began to see more clearly how to endure. Every wall, every watchtower, every practice in the fields beyond the gates is now part of a larger thought. Survival is not enough. Preparation is what makes survival possible again and again. The Gauls came and they left, but they left behind a Rome that would no longer assume walls alone could stand without constant care. The rows of new stone along the edge of the city are easy to name as a defense against the next attack, but they are also markers of unity. Each layer of brick and stone is laid not just by soldiers, but with the aid of civilians, laborers, and artisans. The act of building them is a shared task. In that labor, connections grow between neighbors, between locals, and those from the countryside who come to help. The city becomes not only more secure, but more aware of the strength its people share in times of need. When you walk through this Rome after the rebuilding, the air feels different. The city still carries the memories of fire, but it wears them as reminders. The streets are cleaner. The walls throw longer shadows in the afternoon. Gates open and close with more care. It is as if the city itself has learned to breathe more steadily, not to take its calm days for granted. The Gauls, in their time here, tried to break more than buildings. They tested the city's will. What they left behind was not ruin that lay untouched, but a Rome that had seen its most fragile hour and responded by making that hour less likely to return. The people, like the stone that now rises around them, have built themselves into something harder to dismantle. From this moment forward, Rome's future steps are taken on firmer ground. Its leaders look beyond the immediate walls, thinking now about how other towns and lands around them might fit into a wider plan of security. Trade routes are tended like veins, feeding the city's growth. Roads stretch out in lines that one day will cross much more than the hills of its own region. With the city secure behind its higher walls, its gaze turns outward, gently at first, but with the same steady intention that has carried it through fire and rebuilding. Picture a road so straight it seems to cut the land in two, its pale surface warming under the late afternoon sun. It stretches out until it disappears into a soft gold haze at the horizon. On either side, the quiet reaches of the countryside move gently with the wind. The road is quiet at this moment, but you can imagine footsteps, the roll of cartwheels, and the occasional call of a driver urging on an animal. Day after day, the same route carries people and goods between places that might otherwise feel far away. This path doesn't spill into wild turns or vanish into thickets. It holds its direction, steady and sure, like a line drawn with purpose. In the years after their city grew stronger behind higher walls, Rome began to take careful steps outward. These steps were not only taken by soldiers, they were also taken by stones, gravel, and packed earth arranged to form durable roads that could hold their shape in all seasons. The people of Rome understood that if they wanted to keep the villages, towns, and cities they reached close in spirit, they needed to connect them in body. Without a clear way to travel, even the most promising ties could grow weak. Roads were not made simply to have something to walk upon. They were made to keep voices, goods, and loyalty flowing at a steady pace. If a settlement far from the capital had to wait weeks for word, or send messengers stumbling across rough hillsides, trust could fade, promises could be forgotten, agreed terms could break down. But with a good road beneath their feet, travelers could move without losing time, and conversations that began in one city could be continued in another, without long pauses in between. This made each place along the road feel less like a distant corner and more like a room in the same home. To those who led Rome, that closeness mattered as much as any wall or fort. Walk along one of these roads in your thoughts. You might see soldiers in pairs or small groups, their steps evenly spaced, their faces calm but focused. They move without the strain of forcing their way through thick undergrowth or sudden deep mud. They know they can reach their post, their camp, or their home at a steady pace. On the same road, merchants guide carts or carry goods on their backs, speaking quietly with one another or greeting those they pass. From their point of view, the road is every bit as important. It means their goods reach the market still fresh, their trade agreements kept because the stalls stand stocked on the promised day. During times of quiet, the road serves one kind of purpose. In times of need, it serves another. When word comes of trouble, a garrison can move faster to help. Reinforcements can be sent without the slow crawl over unpredictable country paths. Supplies can travel from the safer center to a more exposed border before a shortage begins to harm the people there. A road works in both directions, carrying help out and bringing news or grain back in. In this way, it acts without speaking, holding the whole of a territory in a kind of shared breath. Think for a moment about what else might travel that surface. Yes, there are people and carts, but also thoughts and ways of living. A craftsman in one town might send a design to another. A farmer might share seed from a particularly strong harvest. Languages mingle more easily where there is a path to follow, just as music or customs might be picked up in one place and carried to another. The road does not decide what is carried along it. It simply makes the carrying possible. Some roads begin at the heart of Rome and push straight outward, reaching towns that once might have been days away by foot. Others form connections between these outlying places, making webs where before there were only points. If you were to look from above, you might see them like threads, crossing hills and valleys with a calm disregard for the tangle of the land beneath them. Bridges lift them over streams. Cuttings take them through hills rather than around. Each has been built with a mind for the fastest, cleanest line between 2 points. It's worth noticing the way these roads feel underfoot. They are built to resist the wear of weather and the steady press of use. Layers beneath the walking surface help drain water, so rains do not slow travel for long. The edges are kept clear enough for carts to pass one another. By their nature, these roads show care both in their design and in their upkeep. A road left to crumble becomes harder to use until it is avoided, and once it's avoided, the ties it keeps will begin to stretch thin. Here is the quiet truth. Roads are not only stone and soil, they are agreements. Each one says that the places it connects are worth the effort to keep close. Maintaining them says that the people on both ends of the journey still matter to one another. For Rome, this meant its influence could be felt far beyond the point where a voice could carry or a messenger could run in a day. That reach, invisible in the air, became solid underfoot. It's easy to picture only soldiers making use of these paths, but in truth, they saw all kinds of travelers. A family might move to a new village where farmland was freshly opened. Traders might carry baskets of olive oil or amphorae of wine to sell in cities that could not produce their own. Officials might ride or walk on inspection tours, checking on the health of towns under their care. Each took something from one place to another and returned with something in its place, whether it was a cart of goods, a message, or simply news overheard in a market. The sense of connection these roads offered went beyond practical needs. They gave a psychological closeness, shrinking the mental distance between Rome and its outlying communities. A person living hundreds of miles from the center still knew there was a direct path leading to it. The road was a constant, unbroken link. On quiet nights, with no traffic in sight, someone could stand on that road and feel part of something larger than their own walls or fields. Even in seasons when snow touched the edges of the mountains or dry winds carried dust across the plains, the roads remained. Travel slowed, but the link endured. Crews would be sent to clear the larger obstacles, repair damage, and make sure the surface stayed sound. This constant attention reflected the value placed on the network. To let a section break down was to risk loosening Rome's hold on the land it had drawn within its reach. As the years passed, the roads across the Italian peninsula began to feel like part of the land itself. Towns grew up around crossings, markets formed where roads met rivers, letting goods flow by boat as well as by cart. These points of meeting often grew into important centers, each benefiting from the flow of travel in more directions than one. Step by step, this changed the shape of life in the entire region, knitting distant places into something more unified than they had been before. When you think of Rome during this time, it is easy to focus on its walls and forums, its temples and public squares, but flowing outward from that center, the roads carried the lifeblood that kept those places thriving. Without them, each town might have grown alone, facing the risk of isolation. With them, each found itself part of a greater whole, able to share in the peace and resources that came with steady, predictable ties. These roads were quiet in their work. They did not march or shout. They did not hold ceremonies or make speeches. Yet they preserved alliances, supported trade, and allowed the quick movement of help where and when it was needed. In many ways, they were the silent diplomats of their time, laying the groundwork for cooperation simply by making connection possible. By the time the network was strong, the Italian peninsula felt less a scattering of regions and more a single body with a shared spine extending through it. The roads did not remove every conflict or challenge, but they made a common life more possible. The steady movement of people and goods along their length reminded everyone that they were bound together, not only by agreements written on scrolls, but by the physical paths beneath their feet. From these well-worn roots, a greater ambition began to grow. If such connections could bind the hills and valleys of Italy, then perhaps they could reach across the open stretches of sea. Just as the roads had carried Rome's hand to its distant neighbors, ships might carry that same steady touch to shores beyond sight of the capital. And so, with the land well tied together, the next chapter would see Rome turn its gaze toward the line where sea meets sky. In the stillness of a quiet harbor, the ships sway gently against their moorings. The water moves with small ripples, each one catching the morning light in a soft, broken reflection. You can almost hear the faint creak of ropes stretching, the tap of a wooden hull against the dock. This scene carries a calm that hides the uncertainty waiting beyond the horizon. Out there, the sea is wide and restless, and soon Rome will have to learn its ways. For now, the ships rest as if unaware of the storms, both of wind and of war, that will soon test their strength. At this time, Rome's power rests mostly on land. The city has built its safety on soldiers who can march great distances along the roads and defend the reaches of the peninsula with skill. The sea lies nearby, but feels like another world, one shaped by winds, currents, and ships that dance across the waves. Carthage is the name that carries weight here, a city whose fleets fill the sea lanes and whose sailors move as easily over water as Romans do along a road. To challenge them means leaving the familiar steadiness of earth and stepping onto decks that shift underfoot. The First Punic War begins with this imbalance. Carthage commands the waters, and their ships patrol with confidence. Rome sees this and knows it cannot hold its growing world without learning how to face an enemy on the sea. It is a step into the unknown. There is no long tradition to lean on when it comes to naval battles. At first, Rome must borrow ships and study their form, watching how they move in open water. It is not enough to copy what is seen. They must also find ways to use their strengths rather than fight only by the rules of others. Early attempts are difficult. Sailors must be trained. Rowers learn their rhythm. The sea has no walls to guard and no gates to bar, so Rome must find a way to make the wide water feel as secure as a fortified city. Patrols begin. Small encounters with Carthaginian ships teach hard lessons about speed, maneuvering, and the way wind can turn advantage into trouble. This is learning done while under threat, each trip onto the open water a chance to test and adjust. One of Rome's answers to this challenge does not start with sails or hulls at all. It begins with a change in the way battles themselves work. Here, they bring the land to the sea. Roman soldiers, strong in close combat, do not try to outsail the skilled Carthaginian crews. Instead, they create something called the corvus, a simple but effective boarding bridge. Picture a heavy wooden plank with a sharp metal spike at its end. When a Roman ship draws close enough to an enemy vessel, the corvus swings down, the spike biting into the deck below, holding the two ships together like clasped hands. Then, the soldiers cross over as if stepping onto a pier. Once on the enemy deck, the sea is no longer in command of the fight. The battle becomes something a Roman soldier knows well. A close, physical struggle where shields and discipline matter more than the turn of the wind or the set of a sail. This shift changes the pattern of naval combat in Rome's favor, allowing its soldiers to fight as they have trained their whole lives, even in the middle of an open sea. Each success builds confidence. Crews grow more familiar with the feel of the water beneath them. Captains learn to use the wind with more ease, charting courses that make the most of both speed and position. Harbors begin to see more Roman ships returning from missions across the water, bringing not only cargo, but also the news that the seas are no longer closed to them. Victories come slowly, but they are steady. After long campaigns, the waters between Sicily and the Italian mainland feel less like a barrier and more like an open road, one that Rome can travel with purpose. The skill gained is not just in sailing, but in planning, knowing where to strike, when to defend, how to move supplies and reinforcements across the shifting surface of the sea. In this, they remain careful. They see the sea as a space to be respected, one that demands preparation just as much as the land. When Carthage can no longer hold its position, the war quiets, and Rome steps into a new kind of role. Sicily, once a contested prize, becomes its first province. This is not a land they must guard against constant attack, but one they must manage. The change from battle to administration is a calm shift, like moving from the shouting of a market to the low voices of a council room. Roads are built here too, not in the same stretches as across Italy, but with the same idea: connection. The harbors are kept busy, now with Roman ships carrying goods and officials instead of soldiers bound for combat. Life in Sicily begins to move with the new rhythm of Roman order. Taxes are collected with rules to guide them. Trade flows more openly as routes become safer. The languages and customs in the air are a mix of old and new, but the presence of Roman governance is steady. For Rome, this is a quiet success. A distant land is now part of its care, joined not by a chain of walls, but by the reach of ships crossing calm waters. This first step into holding territory beyond the mainland shapes the way Rome will think about the sea from then on. The harbors that once saw only local fishing craft now host vessels capable of traveling far along the coastlines and across open stretches. Crews are kept trained, ships are maintained, and the lessons learned in the early, uncertain days of the Punic Wars are remembered. The sea has given Rome both hard trials and the means to grow beyond its own shores. In the lull that follows, the harbor returns to its gentle sounds. Decks are scrubbed, sails patched, ropes coiled neatly along the railings. Merchants check their goods before loading them onto ships bound for other ports. The water here carries no sign of the storms that once shook the timbers beneath them, yet every sailor knows they can return just as quickly as the wind shifts. It is in this knowledge that Rome finds its balance, never careless, but never afraid to set out again. To look at the calm now is to see more than the surface. Beneath it lies the memory of the first time Rome stepped out onto the open water, knowing it was not the master of that space, but determined to learn. It holds the shift from uncertainty to measured confidence, from defending a shoreline to reaching out for distant harbors and returning with them safely linked to its own. The quiet of the harbor is not inexperience anymore. It is readiness. From here, Rome will continue to send ships to new destinations, each journey adding to the map it carries in its mind. Each voyage is marked not only by the distance traveled, but by the trust built between city and crew, land and sea. The space between waves becomes less of a void and more of a pathway, joining places too far for roads to reach. The same steady patience that built the roads through Italy now shapes its presence on the water. What began as an urgent response to Carthage's strength becomes a lasting part of Rome's own power, a calm hand at sea, guiding not just soldiers but merchants, envoys, and settlers. The lessons learned here will serve them in future storms, but for now, they can rest in the knowledge that the sea is no longer a wall at the edge of their world. And as those waters settle into evening light, a different horizon begins to draw their gaze. The heart of the Republic, made firm through land and sea alike, is ready for a season unlike the years before, an age where peace will hold long enough for cities to grow, trade to flourish, and the glow of marble to replace the shadow of war. Soft evening light rests on smooth marble columns, their pale surfaces touched with a faint golden glow as the sun lowers toward the horizon. The air is warm, still with the calm of a summer evening after the busy hum of the day. You can imagine the soft sound of sandals on stone as people cross open squares, the faint laughter from nearby doorways, and the steady murmur of slow conversation. There is no rush here, only a sense that the city, after many unsettled years, now moves at a pace it can sustain. This is Rome under Augustus, the man who stepped forward after the long years when civil wars had torn the Republic apart. By the time he rose to this role, Rome had known not just one but several violent struggles for power. Armies had stood against each other on battlefields, meant to protect them from outsiders. Leaders had fallen, one after another, in struggles fought within their own walls. The city's spirit had been tested to its edges. A people cannot live forever in that kind of strain. They needed something steady under their feet again, a shape to life that did not change with each new power rising above the crowd. Augustus understood that peace could not be declared only in words. The people who had survived years of fighting would not feel at ease unless they could see and touch the changes that meant the worst was behind them. He set his vision on more than what could be enforced by soldiers. A city's life would have to be shaped in daily ways, taxes that could be counted on as fair, armies that were not roaming bands loyal to single generals, but professional legions sworn to the service of Rome itself, spaces where people could meet to celebrate, speak, and trade without the shadow of waiting violence. One of the most important steps was reshaping the armies. During the civil wars, soldiers had often fought for the person who paid them, not for the long life of the Republic. This made every successful general a possible rival to the stability of the whole. Augustus turned the legions into long service, professional forces kept under the authority of the state, rather than shifting political leaders. Soldiers would serve for many years, knowing they would be given land or payment when their service ended. They could focus on guarding the empire's borders rather than worrying where their next orders or their next wages would come from. This offered security not only to the state, but to the soldiers themselves. Taxation became another place for steadiness. In the past, taxes could be unpredictable, collected in ways that shifted depending on who was in charge and who was doing the collecting. It left some burdened unfairly, while others paid little at all. Augustus put in place a clearer system. This might not have made taxes popular, but it gave them a regular rhythm, making it easier for families, traders and farmers to plan for what they owed. This shared understanding meant fewer disputes, and fewer disputes meant less tension in the streets and marketplaces. Beyond the matters of soldiers and taxes, Augustus understood the need for spaces that would make people feel their city was not only safe but thriving. He ordered new forums to be built, open public spaces where markets could gather, trials could be heard, and people could walk among fountains and statues as part of their everyday lives. Temples rose again where old ones had fallen into damage or ruin, their columns and steps, inviting a kind of shared belonging to the city's traditions. These were not decorations for the sake of appearance. They were places that reminded people their city was whole again, that life here could return to patterns remembered from calmer times. Across Rome, buildings of stone and marble replaced older wooden structures. This was more than an improvement in beauty. It was a promise that the city was being built to last. Wooden buildings could burn quickly in the close quarters of the city. Marble and stone stood firm. Streets were repaired, aqueducts maintained to carry clean water, and common areas improved so that daily life felt lighter, less interrupted by the wear and breakage of old neglect. The change in the air was slow but certain. Markets opened each morning with fewer soldiers lingering in tense watch. Roads within the city stayed clear for people walking to their work or moving carts of goods. Festivals returned, not as a rare break in a state of crisis, but as part of the ordinary year. Families could gather in public without the hovering worry that some new conflict was about to spill into the streets. A city cannot be happy every day, but it can be steady, and this alone can feel like a kind of happiness when compared to the years before. Augustus was careful in how he shaped this peace. He kept many familiar structures from the Republic, senates, assemblies, the look of shared power, while guiding them toward the form he wanted. At a glance, the city seemed to carry on old traditions. In practice, the decision-making rested securely in his control. To the ordinary citizen, what mattered most was not the full detail of the political structure, but the fact that life was calm and the city was cared for. This careful balance, honoring the image of the past while creating a functional new order, allowed Augustus to keep the trust of the people while avoiding the quick swings of power that had ended the Republic. In these years, Rome's influence beyond its own streets took on the same sense of steadiness. Provinces were managed more predictably. Governors were expected to maintain order without heavy corruption. Taxes gathered from the provinces reached the capital without being drained away by private hands along the journey. This meant the farthest edges of Roman control felt the same touch as the center, a unity not just in name, but in experience. The peace that grew from this time came to be called the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. It was not simply the absence of war, though war did pause across much of the empire for long stretches. It was the presence of systems, habits, and structures designed to keep that absence possible. It was the familiar feeling of waking to a city that would as likely end the day as it began it, under the same leadership, in the same safety. This predictability acted like a foundation under daily life, allowing people to build their own small plans without fear they would be washed away in sudden unrest. Walking through Rome in the warm evenings of this time, you might see couples sitting on the steps of a temple, sharing quiet conversation as the shadows lengthened. Merchants might still be packing their goods after a day in the forum, their voices easy and unhurried. Children might call to each other as they raced through small streets toward the smell of cooking. The city had trouble still. It would be strange if it did not. But they no longer reached the constant, dangerous pitch of the decades before. The reforms and care in public works had given the streets a sense of belonging again. The marble glow of Augustus's Rome became more than a sight. It was a sign. It said that the city valued its own survival enough to renew itself, and that this renewal was not a single act, but an ongoing choice. To keep aqueducts flowing, markets open, roads safe, and armies ready all required constant attention. It was the quiet work of those years, as much as the grand gestures, that kept the peace in place. The memory of civil war did not vanish. It lived in the thoughts of those old enough to remember how unrest began and what it cost. This made the calm of Augustus's Rome more precious. People understood without speeches that such stability could be lost if not protected. The example set in this time, keeping the forms of old governance while shaping them into a more centralized and orderly model, would echo in how Rome responded to challenges in later centuries. So, as the light softens over those marble columns and the air holds the sense of evening, you can almost feel how the city breathes differently now. The rush to defend against old enemies has eased into the patience required to maintain what has been built. This is the Rome that others in the future will look back on as a model of order and prosperity, a reminder that strength is not only shown in battle, but in the calm that follows. And in the centuries still to come, when the empire faces storms of its own, this period will stand as a guide, a reminder that clear structure, fair systems, and the visible care of the city can hold people together long after the memory of fighting has faded. Picture a wall stretching across wide open hills. The grass moves in the wind, soft and even, and the stones rest in a long, quiet line against the sky. It is not a hurried structure. It is measured, built with time and thought. You can follow it with your eyes as it rises and dips over the land, marking a choice made far away, not to push farther outward, but to keep what is already held safe. This is the kind of boundary that speaks softly, yet holds firm. The emperor at this moment is Hadrian. His choice is different from those before him who pushed Rome's borders to new limits. Instead of sending armies deeper into distant lands, he looks at the vast space already joined to the empire and sees the weight of guarding it all. Every mile of land beyond the edge means more men to defend it, more supply lines to keep open, more unrest to calm when control falters. To keep expanding is to keep adding new strains. To hold and protect what exists means shifting the focus from attack to stability. It is not that expansion is always wrong, but it often carries its own kind of danger. Newly taken lands may not share Rome's laws, language, or customs. They may look to old leaders rather than the empire's rule. The early years in such places can be restless. Rebellion can take root quickly if forces are stretched too thin to watch and guide life there. Hadrian sees this not in fear, but with a clear sense that Rome's strength should not be measured only in how far it reaches. Peace, if it is to last, sometimes asks for limits. The decision to build and strengthen boundaries is one that touches far more than soldiers. Trade moves differently along a defined edge. Towns near the border know that a line has been drawn. One side is Roman, the other is not. There is a clarity to that, a sense of where responsibilities and protections begin and end. It is easier to plan when you know what you must hold, rather than chase a horizon that keeps moving away from you. Hadrian's Wall is one of the clearest examples of this thinking. Stretching across the north of Britain, it is built of stone and turf, wide enough for marches and patrols, high enough to be seen from a distance. It is not only a military barrier, it functions as a checkpoint, controlling who moves in and out, and as a place where trade can pass through under watch. The image of the wall from afar might seem purely defensive, but up close, it hums quietly with the movement of daily life. Supplies brought in, messages carried along its length, goods exchanged at controlled crossings. For the soldiers stationed there, the wall creates a rhythm. They walk its top in the daylight, looking out across open land beyond, scanning for movement. At night, they keep watch from sheltered points, the wind cool against their faces. The days repeat, and in that repetition is the comfort of a known task. The people who live on the Roman side of the wall rest easier knowing that any trouble from outside is unlikely to arrive without warning. On the other side, traders from beyond the empire can approach the gates, show their goods, and bargain for safe entry. In this way, the wall is less of an end and more of a meeting point. Villages nearby might depend on these exchanges, and over time, ideas as well as goods pass through. Styles of clothing, tools, and even foods can spread across the boundary, carried in pockets and packs, unnoticed by the guards who watch mainly for threats. In this way, the wall becomes a thread of connection as much as it is a line of separation. There is a lesson in this balance. Not every show of strength is about advancing forward. Sometimes real strength is in stopping at the right moment, holding the space you have and making it secure. Hadrian's choice gives Rome time to breathe. Resources can be sent inward to improve roads, repair buildings, and keep the provinces well tended. Soldiers who are not needed for constant expansion can be rotated to maintain borders more evenly, reducing the risk of sudden gaps in defense. The calm that follows is different from the excitement of conquering new lands. It is quieter, but in many ways more valuable. Farmers can trust that their fields near the edges will not suddenly become battlegrounds. Traders can set routes knowing they will not be cut off by unexpected campaigns. Families living in distant provinces can feel part of something whole rather than living on the uncertain edge between empire and unknown. Still, holding a boundary is not without its demands. Weather wears on the stones. Wood rots in the damp air. Patrols must keep moving even on the coldest days, when frost coats the ground and the air stings in the lungs. Repairs are constant. Supplies must be delivered, and those deliveries must be protected. Yet each task is familiar, and the familiarity is its own foundation for order. The space within the walls of the empire begins to feel more settled. Attention can shift to building, to tending the connections between places already under Roman care. The army is still present and ready, but the sense of being pulled toward new battles on distant frontiers eases. The focus turns inward, strengthening the ties that will be needed when the smooth seasons end as they always do, because they will end. Boundaries can hold much, but time will still bring new challenges. The strength built in these years will be measured not only in stone, but in the readiness of the people to face what comes. A border well cared for is more than a line on a map. It is a sign to both sides that Rome is steady, watchful, and not in a hurry to overextend itself. Hadrian's Wall in the north may seem far from the heart of the empire, but it stands as a marker of a broader choice. Similar care is given to other edges, shaped by the same thinking. In deserts, rivers, and mountain passes, Rome sets its limits and maintains them, each in a way suited to the land. These are not random pauses in growth. They are deliberate, aimed at drawing a strong, clear outline around the world Rome can hold without thinning its own strength. There is also a change in the way Rome sees its neighbors. Beyond the walls and boundaries are peoples with their own order, their own ways of life. Some may never come under direct control, but they can still be part of peaceful exchange. When the line is respected, trade and diplomacy can do the work that once might have been left to armies. The wall's gates then become symbols as much as stone and timber, entrances for those who come in peace, barriers to those who do not. Over time, the hills and grass around Hadrian's Wall grow on without care for its meaning, yet the wall remains. Even in periods when conflict is far away, its presence reminds people that peace here is not accidental. It is the result of planning, labor, and the decision to value holding what is secure over chasing what is new. The men who walk its length each day become part of that decision, keeping the line marked by their steps as much as by the stones beneath them. Within the empire, the breathing space created by these boundaries allows leaders to address other needs. Roads in disrepair, cities in need of fresh water, laws to settle disputes that might otherwise grow into unrest. This inward attention is not dramatic, but it is what keeps the parts of the empire joined together. Hadrian's stance shows that sometimes the most important advances are those made within the space you already have. The years pass in this slower rhythm. The provinces remain connected, the armies remain trained, trade moves across both land and sea, knowing the pathways are watched over. From the hills of the north to the warm harbors of the south, Rome holds steady. The edge is not quiet because nothing happens. It is quiet because the systems in place keep what happens from spreading into chaos. This period of calm at the borders allows the empire to grow inwardly strong. Yet history moves in its own cycles, and every calm season will meet its change. Trouble will come again, from within or without, and the readiness formed here will be tested. Hadrian's measured choice, marked in stone and remembered across miles of land, will stand as one of the reasons Rome can meet those trials without breaking. And soon, the story will turn toward those later tests, moments that will ask not only for walls, but for the full resilience of the empire. As you rest, think of Rome's story as a path made from many small steps. Each challenge brought a quiet answer. Each answer shaped the next. No single moment carried it alone. Like stones placed carefully, they formed a ground strong enough to hold centuries of life. History often shows that the lasting things grow this way, not in sudden leaps, but in steady movement. You can let that thought settle with you now. Time and patience make change real. Even the smallest, simplest effort can become part of something greater, something that keeps standing long after the day has passed.